Okay, hello everybody. I'm re-recording this video because the previous video did not have closed captioning, and once I realized that, the easiest way to remedy that situation or fix it is to just go ahead and create a new video. So we're going to walk through this made-up example of a rhetorical analysis. I did write this one as if I were a student. So a lot of what we see in here is it's not a perfect paper, right? This is a fairly average paper. And as we go through, I'll talk through what they're doing, kind of why I think they might be doing certain things and what could be improved. So I'm going to actually start with how I would begin my grading process if I was on Canvas in what we call speed grader and I came to a student paper. First thing I always do is check the formatting. So top left corner, we have the student's name, instructor's name, class, and date. So that is good. That is a correct header for MLA format. In the top right-hand corner, we have the student's last name and page numbers. That is also correct. So we're good there. Now, I don't think this is in double spacing, but I do think in full transparency that I changed it to print out to take to a class at one point. So we'll go ahead and say that, okay, it's in double spaced, 12-point font. I see that the title is centered. The first paragraph is indented. And then if I scroll down here, I don't want to do this too fast because I know it makes some people kind of dizzy. I see that the second paragraph is indented. The third paragraph is indented. I'll scroll a little bit further down here. There's the next paragraph also indented. I don't see any formatting issues. And then we get to the conclusion. Okay, conclusion. All the formatting looks good. There's also a works cited here, which has the author's name, the title of the source text, where it was published in italics, that slanted font, the URL where this was found, and then the date it was accessed. Okay, so all of that looks good. That's an easy, quick visual check. And now I'm going to go back to the top. So I'm going to scroll back to the top here. Forgive me, I don't want to make anybody dizzy. Okay, so we're going to look at the very first paragraph on its own. So it says, delivered at a women's suffrage convention in Akron, Ohio in 1851, Sojourner Truth's speech, Ain't I Woman, has become one of the most enduring speeches made on the rights of women. A seminal text in the world of intertextual feminism, Truth delivered her speech extemporaneously before a crowd comprised primarily of white men. The convention took place in the North prior to the American Civil War. As such, Truth was likely speaking to a predominantly sympathetic audience. Now I'm going to pause there in the middle of the paragraph and just talk about what we have so far, right? So far, we have who the author is. We know a little bit about her. We're going to learn a little bit more later on. We know the situation, so we're building that rhetorical situation, when and where, and how that affects things. Now, some of the details here are not necessarily part of the text that we have, which means the student would have had to do a little bit of outside work looking this up, which, if it's biographical information, is okay. And they found that, oh, okay, this is in the North prior to the American Civil War, probably a sympathetic audience. These things would be what we consider common knowledge. So even though not everybody knows all of this information, I don't need a citation because it's going to be in everything that I find on this source, every encyclopedia entry or Wikipedia entry, everywhere, right? So I'm going to pick up in the middle here with however. So it says, however, she is keenly aware that the audience is focused not on all women's rights, but on white women's rights. To highlight the true scope of the situation, Truth leverages the rhetorical situation to her advantage. Truth calls attention to her identity as a woman, an African American, a mother, and a former slave. Throughout the speech, Truth calls attention to the disconnect between her personal experience and the positions argued by others at the convention. Truth effectively utilizes her personal experience and biblical allusion to say that women's rights should extend to all women regardless of color. So again, if we think SOAP, right? Speaker, occasion, audience, purpose. We know a little bit about her as a speaker, right? A woman, African-American, mother, former slave. We know the occasion, Women's Rights Convention, 1851, pre-Civil War. We know audience, primarily white men and sympathetic. And we know her purpose. right? She's trying to argue that women's rights should extend to all women, regardless of color. Now, in the thesis statement, we also have two rhetorical strategies. So we have personal experience and biblical allusion. I would recommend that you pick a third rhetorical strategy because that's going to make your life easier in the long run, and make sure that those strategies match up to your topic sentences, which is something that we'll look at here in a minute. Overall, not a bad intro paragraph, not a bad thesis. So we're doing pretty well. Again, not a perfect essay, but I find that it's actually more informative to look at sort of B-range papers to get an idea of what's working and what's not working. So let's scroll down to the first body paragraph. So we have the topic sentence: truth forces her audience to acknowledge the complexity of women's rights as not solely an issue of gender, but also an issue of class and skin color. That's not a bad topic sentence, but I would say we could make that stronger by really focusing in on personal experience, which is what we're going to see here in a minute. Because truth could acknowledge the complexity without talking about her personal experience. Her personal experience is the strategy that she is using, which is what we want to be looking at for rhetorical analysis. So picking up after that first sentence, we have: to call attention to the situation, truth uses simple directives such as "look at me." This powerful command requires that the audience looks not only at her as a woman, but also as a person of color. She further calls attention to her experience by demanding that the audience look at my arm, which allows her to further call attention that she could, quote, work as hard as any man. Here, by comparing herself to a man, she is working to establish equality at the level of sheer physical labor. This rhetorical strategy allows her to pivot towards her equal abilities and the things that distinguish men from women. In this case, she highlights childbirth. This theme will later allow her to use biblical allusion. Now, if I just scroll back up here a second while I'm talking about it, again, not bad, but it seems that we're sort of getting away from the personal experience part and really talking more about personal directives and wording or tone. And if that's the case, it's an easy fix. We just fix that topic sentence and then replace personal experience with directives, straight directives in that thesis statement. And that's going to fix a lot of the problems here. So not bad. We're headed in the right direction. One thing I'll mention is you don't see any in-text citations here, which is okay because we're only talking about one source and that source doesn't have any page numbers. So we're actually okay in that regard, if just in case you were wondering. Okay, so let's scroll down here to the second body paragraph. So that one starts out: given the rhetorical situation in which truth was speaking, she would have been keenly aware that most of her audience was white and Christian. Truth uses biblical allusion at several points to create an appeal directly to her audience. That's sort of a two-sentence topic sentence, and that's okay. I'm actually okay with the way that this works. I do think it could be stronger. In order to strengthen it, I would probably rewrite to something like: truth uses biblical allusion to directly access her audience, which is made up of people who are white and Christian. Just a little bit more straight into the point. So picking up after that second sentence, it says: the first instance of this is when she combines motherhood with religion. She says, quote, have borne 13 children and seen most all sold off to slavery. When I cried out my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. In this case, she is effectively combining one of the powerful abilities of women, childbirth, with religion and emotion. Her audience, comprised of sympathetic individuals, would undoubtedly feel a sense of pain that she must have felt at having her children taken from her. This not only makes her more relatable, but it also establishes a sense of grief that only a mother could feel. Later, she will return to the combination of childbirth and religion when she says, quote, where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him. This sharp criticism highlights women's power by invoking the story of the Virgin Mary in Christian theology. Here she is also connecting all women to the holiness found in shared scripture. This is a well-calculated move since it combines womanhood and religion and connects to something sacred. So not bad. This paragraph is actually much better than the previous paragraph. The choices are good. Maybe fixing the topic sentence would help a little bit. And if I wanted to be picky, I'd say if the audience is made up of white men, I'm not sure how childbirth factors into this directly. Like, it's not as direct as if she's talking to a group of white women. But that, again, would also be an easy fix and something where we could just, look at either who really was in the audience, do we have any information, or making the claim that it's still a parent type idea. And probably statistically speaking, most people at the time were parents. I have no way of knowing for sure. We'd have to look into it. So then let's look at the third. I think there's a third body paragraph. And it says, truth moves beyond merely pointing out that women deserve equal rights. After all, if she were simply to argue for equal rights, she would be preaching to the choir. Her audience is already sympathetic to the idea that women should be granted suffrage. Side note, suffrage is equal rights and the ability to vote. Truth is conscious that what is being overlooked is how people of color were not often included in the move towards suffrage. To do so, Truth calls upon her own experiences as a Black woman. So here we're getting back to that idea of personal experience, and you can see maybe that now it's a little bit muddied, right? A little bit confused, because a reader is going to have that thesis generally sort of in the back of their brain as the contract, the thing that we're doing. So it says, truth establishes the relationship between the two movements, abolition and suffrage, in the second sentence of her speech when she says, I think twixt the Negroes of the South and the women of the North all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. Here she is connecting two movements directly. She sets a tone for the rest of her short speech. An astute audience, or an audience that is aware, would be sure to assume that this speech would combine both movements. That makes sense. One of the most powerful aspects of this speech is the repetition of the rhetorical question, Ain't I a woman? Truth demands that her audience sees her not merely as a freed slave. She wants to be seen not only as a woman and a mother. Truth wants the audience to see her as a resilient and powerful Black woman that she is. In doing so, she establishes a connection between the two movements. This connection might have been used to create additional momentum and cooperation between the movements had it not been for the Civil War that began less than a decade later. Again, not bad. I think this is another case where, if I scroll up here, it might be more effective to really just focus on the rhetorical questions. This other quote, I think, between the North and the South, it seems a little bit out of place here to me, but I'm also being a little bit nitpicky with this particular video, just to sort of make a point that there's always room for improvement. And again, that's not to say you couldn't get an A on this paper. You can absolutely get 100% or an A. But I'm still always going to encourage people to work on their writing and improve their clarity and strength. Okay, so we come finally to the conclusion. Truth's speech, while short, is incredibly effective in its ability to combine two parallel movements. To connect the movements, Truth highlighted her experience in the United States in 1851. By drawing upon her personal experience in biblical allusion, Truth is able to craft a message that would resonate with her contemporaries. However, the speech continues to resonate today, and the rise in intertextual feminism, which seeks to combine racial equality and gender equality. Had Truth not been keenly aware of the rhetorical situation, she might not have delivered a speech as powerful and enduring. Ultimately, it is not her use of rhetorical strategies, but her palpable, or the emotions we can feel, that makes her speech so incredibly powerful. I would say it's an okay conclusion. I think streamlining the other things would help this student. What is maybe not working great in this conclusion is really creating that connection between the rhetorical situation and why Truth chose those strategies based on that situation. And I'll say, just to be clear, I don't know that Truth was thinking, oh, I'm going to use, rhetorical questions and I'm going to use biblical allusion. She was speaking from the heart, but we make a lot of these rhetorical choices at a subconscious level when we're speaking kind of on the fly. So I think by really pointing out, hey, here are the things that I talked about in the 3 paragraphs. I talked about Truth's personal experience. I talked about biblical allusion. I talked about rhetorical questions. All of this she was using because she was talking to an audience who was somewhat sympathetic, but not entirely sympathetic, right? So she wasn't talking to a bunch of people who were already on board, thinking, yeah, let's do this. Let's combine the two movements. She was talking to people who were on board with the suffrage part, the women's rights part, but probably would have been a little bit uncomfortable and maybe even adversarial, right, to this idea of combining suffrage and abolition. again, just a guess, but that's part of what we're doing with an analysis. Lastly, in the last two sentences of the essay, it uses the word powerful twice. That repetition doesn't really work well for me, but also the last sentence makes a judgment call, incredibly powerful, which we don't really need to do. Again, you could focus just on here's what they do and here's why they're doing it. Truth uses biblical allusion because people in the audience would have been of that religion. Truth uses rhetorical questions to call attention to who she is and point out a sort of logical flaw in maybe the arguments that other people are making. So there you go. I hope that helps. If you have questions, comments, concerns, jokes, memes, recipes, let me know. Otherwise, I will talk to you all later.